fear that we pastors and teachers are making a serious mistake when we assume that our people and students understand Calvinism just because they call themselves Calvinists. I have attempted to write a simple, easy-to-understand explanation of the 5 points of Calvinism. I have tried to write a book that you might hand to a young Calvinist or to someone who just wants to understand what Calvinism is, with the confidence that he or she will be able to understand the book. I have deliberately used a lot of illustrations that have helped me to understand these truths myself and explain them to others. Several years ago, I announced to my classes that the following week I planned to lecture on the 5 points of Calvinism. Before the lectures, a student met me on campus, and with a concerned expression she asked, "Dr. Orrick, when you lecture on Calvinism, you are going to use the Bible, aren't you?" She went on to explain her question, observing that most of the discussions she had heard about Calvinism were more philosophical than biblical. I assured her that I would indeed use the Bible as the basis for everything I said, and I assure you of the same. You might listen to this book and think that I am misinterpreting the Bible, but if you are fair-minded, you will have to admit that I am trying to recognize and interpret what the Bible says. At least, that has been my goal. Dr. Tom Nettles read the manuscript of this book and made several excellent suggestions, which I incorporated. Thank you. Years ago, you told me to stop calling you Dr. Nettles and to call you by your first name, so I have. But I want you to know that, on the inside, I still call you Dr. Nettles. My wife Carol read the manuscript, and she too made valuable suggestions, and I incorporated nearly all of them. Thank you. 1. Calvinism. More than the 5 points. In 2 sentences, what is a Calvinist? The old farmer sitting across the table from me at the restaurant was not a troublemaker at church. In fact, he had been a peacemaker. It was he who had contacted me about becoming the interim pastor of the church where he had spent all of his 80-plus years. The church was without a pastor because they had found it necessary to fire their former pastor, who by all accounts had proven himself to be an imprudent, impatient, pushy young upstart. He had very nearly split the church. He was a Calvinist. I do not think it was his Calvinism that got him fired. I do not think so because, during the 15 months that I served as interim pastor of that wonderful little church, I plainly preached the doctrines of God's sovereign grace as I encountered those truths again and again throughout a year-long exposition of Hebrews. During my ministry there, the church healed and grew, and when they called a full-time pastor and my ministry there concluded, I was deeply sad to leave a church I had come to love profoundly, and whose strong love for me I had felt as well. All those happy months of my ministry there were still future on that day when I sat across the table from the old farmer. In the absence of a pastor, he was the de facto leader of the church. I had preached at a nearby church during much of the preceding summer, and people from that church had recommended me to him. His church did not interview me before asking me to serve as their interim. I suppose they trusted the people who had recommended me. I also suppose that the farmer had only recently learned that I, their newly called interim pastor, was a Calvinist. I imagine that when that wise, gracious farmer learned that I was a Calvinist, he must have thought, "Oh no, a Calvinist preacher just came within a hair's breadth of destroying our church, and now somehow we have called another Calvinist to be our interim pastor." I must surmise all this because, if he had these misgivings, he never let a word of it slip out of his mouth that day in the restaurant. Instead, without any prelude, he asked me, "In two